Hi everybody! If you've watched the previous videos, welcome back, and if you are new to my channel, hello and welcome. It's lovely to have you here. So I am currently converting a doll's house into a miniature warehouse with an apartment at the top and an art gallery at the bottom. So in my previous video I'd started to make a little balcony and a staircase that would fit onto the outside of my doll's house so that the upstairs apartment could be accessed. When I first bought this doll's house, it had 3 stories and it was set out like a house, and I started to restructure the inside of it. There is a previous video about this, but the internal restructure isn't quite finished yet. But I did remove the staircases inside the doll's house because I wanted my art gallery space at the bottom, and this meant that the apartment above needed a different way to be accessed. So this little staircase will go up the side of the doll's house on the outside, and I've already cut a hole in the side of the doll's house for where the door will go. So if you watched the last video, you will know where I'm up to with this balcony and staircase. If you haven't, I'll pop a link at the top of this video so you can go back and watch it first if you'd like. I have documented the full makeover right from the start in a playlist, so I will pop the link in the description below. So for my little miniature balcony, I still needed to make the back panel for it, and I also needed to put the steps on the stairs. I was making this back panel in exactly the same way that I'd made the other panels in the previous video, but you will see in a minute that I actually made a mistake and I got my measurements wrong. Now I'm not sure how I got my measurements wrong. I think it's highly likely that I used the wrong part of my ruler, because I have a ruler that has a different scale on each side of it. So it's actually got, I think it's got 6 scales on it, and you turn it around and it gives you the different scales. So I think it's likely that I used the wrong scale when I was measuring, and this resulted in this being a little bit too small. So when it came to attaching it, this was the point that I realised that it didn't fit. So you may not be able to quite see here, but there's a big gap at the top. So instead of there being a gap at the top, I decided to line this up with the side panel at the top, but there's now a gap at the bottom at the back. I actually quite like it, you can see it quite clearly here. I don't mind it, I think it looks like it's meant to be like that, so I'm going to leave it like that rather than remaking it. Next, it was time to make the little steps to go onto the staircase. Thank you to everybody who left a comment on my last video, because I'd been using balsa wood for the very first time and I'd found that it was splitting when I cut it in one direction against the grain. And I had quite a few comments saying it's always best to cut against the grain first and then make your second or last cut to be the one with the grain. So I tried this technique and it worked really well. So thank you so much, because my wood did not split whilst I was making the rest of this miniature. In total, I think that this miniature staircase and balcony has taken me about probably between 15 and 20 hours to make. I'm really glad that I've invested that time into making it, because I'm pleased with the outcome, but yeah, it's been a really long project. I think it's probably the miniature that's taken me the longest to make out of any miniature that I've ever made. So I attached the steps, and it was really tricky to find a position for it to dry in so that the steps would dry at the right angle, but I propped the staircase up on my paint pot and that seemed to work. However, when I looked at it after it had dried, I realised I'd made a mistake. So there was a big hole here, but that was the bit where you're meant to step up from the top step. But the top step is here, with a tiny little gap to step up from the top step, and then, yeah, there's a big space behind it. So I worked out that I needed to move this staircase backwards a bit. So I gently tried to remove the side panels from the staircase so that I could trim them down a little bit and then move them further backwards. You might notice that because the back panel was the wrong size, it's a little bit loose. So later on I do put a little bit more wood on the back panel to secure it in place. I used my miter shears to cut this wood so that it was at the correct angle. And then I reattached it in the correct position. I tried to not put too much glue on because I didn't want to be able to see the glue. By the end of this video, I'm absolutely covered in glue and paint and all of my different materials. So next I wanted to do a little banister. So I cut out some more mesh and I cut out a side piece that would go at an angle and then a vertical piece of wood too. Then I decided to add a wooden panel down the side to cover up any of the mesh that was overlapping over the wood, and I thought that this would make it a little bit neater. My piece of wood wasn't quite long enough, so it does have a tiny little triangle at the bottom where it didn't reach, but I quite like that triangle as a design feature. Added some details. And then my next step was to add little bits of wood around a lot of the edges to try and make it look nice and neatly finished. I think that these pieces of wood made a huge difference actually to the finished result. They also helped to make the structure a little bit stronger. I had a second staircase that I'd removed from my doll's house, and I decided to use this to make a few little steps to step up from the balcony to the door. This time I did actually use the steps that were already there, rather than cutting my own out of balsa wood, because they could be a little bit wider. I added some trim along the top here, but I encountered a little bit of a problem because the front piece of trim here, I didn't have a piece of wood long enough to reach right from one side to the other. So I had this little gap at the end. So I decided to cut the piece of wood at an angle still, and then to make a little planter to sit a plant in, to just attach to the end here to fill the gap. Again, I added some trim around the edges just to try and neaten it off and make it look nicely finished. So this is what it was looking like. So I left it to dry before going on to paint it. Whilst it was drying, I tidied up some of the materials that I'd been using. So I saved all of the bits of wood that I thought might come in useful for future projects. I'm always unsure of what to keep. I like to keep tiny little bits just in case. Now it was time to move on to painting this structure, and I hadn't been sure about whether to paint it black or green, but then I'd actually made the decision that I was going to paint the areas around the mesh black and the rest of the structure where it would be wood green. But as I was doing this, I actually changed my mind, because I found that I needed to go over the edges like this with black so that it would seep into some of the little gaps where the card didn't quite meet the wood. Now, I decided that what I would do was paint the whole structure black and see how it looked, and then decide if I wanted to add any green to this. If you've not watched my previous videos, the reason why I'm thinking of adding some green is because I've already painted the areas above my windows of the doll's house green, so I wanted it to match. This is what it looked like when it was all painted black. Whilst this was drying, I moved on to work on the pavement area where the little staircase would stand. Now in my last video I'd started to make this pavement area, but I'd said that I wasn't happy with the colour of it, so I would have to paint it. I'd also said that I wanted it to be quite a warm colour. I didn't really want it to be a grey pavement just because I didn't feel like it would match the doll's house that well, and also it's going to sit in my dining room and my dining room's got quite warm colours in it, so I wanted it to match my interior of my real house. So I had some suggestions about using cobbles or bricks, and I thought this was a really nice idea. So I had a little file tool and I used this to scrape away at the filler to make some cobble shapes. They're all slightly different shapes and sizes. In some areas, as I made these little indents, some of the little cobbles actually came off the board. So you will notice later that I stick them back down, and it was really fun working out where they needed to go, so you can see them here that they've come away. It was like doing a jigsaw puzzle. But I actually really liked how it looked afterwards because it meant that some of them were just a little bit out of place, just like you may see on a normal pavement. I really liked the effect actually. So I decided to paint this a grey colour to begin with, and then I thought I could make it a little bit warmer with some other colours. So I mixed some cobalt blue with some, I can't remember what that brown colour is. I think it's burnt sienna. I was using my colour mixing book by Julie Collins called The Colour Mixing Companion, which is just an amazing book for working out which colours to mix to get the colours that you want. So I then added some umber. And this made a nice browny grey colour, which I used to cover all of the cobbles. This is where I was sticking the cobbles back into place. It was so fun. It's a while since I've done a jigsaw. I don't actually think I put the correct cobbles in the right places, but it doesn't matter. So I then added some white paint to the mixture that I already had, and I used this to add some highlights. And at this time I sort of lightly brushed over the cobbles so that the colour wouldn't go into the gaps between the cobbles or bricks. But I did find that this colour of the mixture was a little bit too blue. So later on I added some yellow ochre, which really helped. So when the black paint had dried, I decided to paint some of the trim using green paint. And whilst that was drying, and after the acrylic paint had dried on the pathway, I decided to start working on the path with these pastels because I wanted to add some more brown tones to it. You might notice that my cat's in the background there. I didn't start working with these pastels until she'd left the room, just because they're very dusty, so I wouldn't want to use them while she was around. So I started by adding some brown pastel. And then I actually started to add some of this lilac-y, pinky colour. I really liked how the pathway was looking now, and actually I almost feel like this looks like brick more than the actual bricks of my house look. So I also decided to add a tiny bit of green, not much though, because the only greens that I had in these pastels were really bright, so I just added a teeny tiny bit. Then it was time to position the balcony and staircase. Now, I did find that I needed to remove a little bit of the stonework from the bottom here, just because I needed the staircase to fit quite closely next to the side of the house so that it didn't come off the side of the pathway. Then I glued it in place. I haven't actually put any glue on the base of the staircase, so it's not actually glued down to the pathway. Now, I did do this so that I could still lift the doll's house up from the pathway if I wanted to, because it makes it easy to move because it's all actually getting quite heavy. But actually later on I did add some extra details, and the glue runs along the path and the doll's house. So it's important now that I actually don't lift the doll's house from the board underneath. So this door was originally inside this doll's house, and I was going to change it a bit, maybe paint it a different colour and add some windows, but when I positioned it in place I actually really liked how it looked. What do you think? Do you think it should be a different colour, or do you think it should stay like this? For the little steps that lead up to the door, I'm not sure whether to paint them green as well. What do you think? Because I don't think you can really see them here. I think they camouflage in with the black mesh around them. So this is the point where I glued onto the base and the doll's house at the same time. I think I probably still would be able to lift the doll's house off the base because I've not actually glued the doll's house to the base, but I think if I did this it would probably lift the moss from the pavement. So this is the moss that I'd collected from my garden in an earlier video and had dried it out, so I was just adding it along the bottom here. At this point the moss kept getting stuck to me because I had glue everywhere. I added some moss at the front here as well. I was going to add more moss down the front of the doll's house as well, but I actually changed my mind because I thought that the gallery owner would have probably done some gardening outside. So I need to make a little doorstep that leads up to the front door of the gallery, and this is how everything was looking. You might notice the tiny little bike. So I bought this bike a long time ago, either a year or maybe 2 years ago from the York Dolls House Fair, and I was really pleased when I bought it. I've actually seen it a lot of times since at other Dolls House Fairs, but I think it looks really nice sat here, so it's owned by the person that lives in the apartment. So I still need to paint the steps that lead up to the door, and I need to maybe put some decoration on the door, maybe a little letterbox, or I might put the letterbox down at the bottom of the stairs, and a little house number, and I need to add a plant to the basket. So yeah, I'm really pleased with how this is looking, especially the pathway. The pathway wouldn't have looked how it looks right now if it wasn't for the suggestions that I'd had in my previous videos comments, so thank you so much because I do read all of them and they're all really, really helpful. My next step is to start working on the doll's house roof, and I've not decided yet whether to do slate tiles like it's currently got or a different type of roof. In fact, that would be really helpful to know your opinions on that. The reason why I'm not sure about the slate is again because of its cool bluish colour, but yeah, I'm not sure. So if you could let me know your thoughts, that'd be great. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed the video. If you're not already subscribed, please do, and it'd be lovely to hear from you in the comments. I hope that you have a lovely week, and I will see you in the next video.